Hello there, Ramblers, and welcome back to another instalment of Reese Rambles, my weekly podcast all about the latest comings and goings, movings and shakings, and indeed all the rest of it in the worlds of vintage and retro computing, gaming, and technology. Hope you're all doing well out there. It is very, very cold here in the UK, bitterly cold, in fact, ice on the roads and ice on the pavements and stuff. It is even snowing in some parts of the country, particularly up north in Yorkshire and Scotland, and I believe there's some snow down south as well, but not here, not here in the middle where I live. As always, we miss out on all of the most exciting stuff, but there you go. We just get the bad parts of it. So I think, without further ado, as they say here on YouTube, far too much, let's move on with our first story of the week. And this is the Analogue 3D. So Analogue, the people best known for the Analogue Pocket, of course, their handheld console based on the Nintendo Game Boy, supports all of those original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and it's an FPGA-based implementation of that with a really nice modern screen and stuff on it, some really nice touches, very well-engineered piece of hardware, very highly regarded as well by the people who own them, and almost impossible to get hold of one as well. For some reason, Analogue don't seem to make a lot of them. And they have gone and done it again with the 3D, which is based on the N64, the 3D console from Nintendo from 1996, of course developed in conjunction, I believe, with SGI, was it, who did the graphics hardware for the N64. Ridiculously over-engineered console at the time, and one that actually kind of passed me by as well. So, yeah, it seems the embargo date dropped a few days ago, and this came up on pretty much every single YouTube channel that I subscribe to, and indeed that I have notifications turned on for. So my notifications were all Analogue 3D reviews, all at the exact same time. You'd think they'd spread it out a bit, but there you go. So I'm showing you some footage here from LGR's review in particular, because this is the one that I chose to watch. And he speaks very highly of this, I will say. I don't want to spoil his review. I will, of course, link it down below so you can go and check it out. But yeah, it seems right out of the gate, this is an excellent piece of hardware. Supports all of the original cartridges and things. Has some really nice features, some effects, some I can't find the right word. Shaders, that's the word that I'm looking for. CRT effects that you can apply to the picture, which apparently work really well. Of course, you scan lines and stuff as well. Native 4K output. You can switch between 4K 60 and 1080p. It's got a Cyclone 10 FPGA in it, so it's a much more powerful version of the FPGA that's used in the Mister project, for example. And all in all, a brilliant piece of hardware, and should only improve in future once Analogue release further firmware updates and things to add some new functionality. So, yeah, and you can play your original cartridges with your original controllers. So the negative points that I have seen across the internet seem to focus on those shaders perhaps not going quite far enough. There are some really advanced CRT effects and things out there that this doesn't really seem to support, but of course that could be added later on. The menu system, that's something that Clint mentions. Really nice interface where you insert your cartridge and then it gets added to a list, and it shows all of the information with the artwork and stuff as well. But no real way to kind of edit the information and stuff there and reorganize things. And as Clint pointed out, there's also spelling mistakes and stuff in there. But of course, that's all stuff that Analogue can fix later on. And the price was also something else that seemed to come up quite a lot, $250. Of course, you can buy an N64 for next to nothing nowadays, and you can stick a HDMI mod in it, or indeed use it with an external scaler, as Clint does show in this review, and get pretty much the same effect for a lot less money. But hey, of course, this is a limited thing. It is an enthusiast thing, and it is a very well-built piece of hardware. So we'll focus on the positives. And we'll go through and look at some of the information on the website. They are not, I'm singing their praises, and they're not even giving me any money for this, and they haven't even sent me one. I don't know. Anyway, it seems to be the talk of the town at the moment, so of course we have to cover it. Yeah, their reimagining of the N64 reads the website in 4K resolution. That's 10 times the resolution of the original N64. The first and perhaps greatest multiplayer system of all time. What about the Atari Jaguar? I don't know. I'm joking. Analogue 3D is 100% compatible with every original N64 game ever made. Region-free, Bluetooth LE, dual-band Wi-Fi, 4 original-style controller ports, entirely new next-generation analog hardware featuring 3D OS, engineered entirely in FPGA, no emulation. And I know their no emulation marketing has come up for some flack in the past because, of course, a lot of people would define FPGA as emulation if you look at the dictionary definition. I'm not going to dig into that. Of course, they mean no software emulation. This isn't an ARM SoC thing running a software emulator like a lot of other mini consoles and recreations and things out there. For example, my beloved Atari 2600 Plus. No, this is FPGA based. So, that is that. Of course, very difficult to get hold of. The people that pre-ordered them are receiving them now, as are a lot of those YouTubers doing the reviews and stuff. $249.99. It's available in black and white. And they have also partnered with 8BitDo as well, the people that make the fantastic controllers. I use their Ultimate controllers for playing games on my PC, oddly enough. And they are excellent. And they have made an N64 controller, the 8BitDo 64 Bluetooth controller, which you can use in conjunction with this console. And in fact, the selection of controllers that are compatible with it is apparently quite limited. That is something that came up in Clint's review as well. And they don't come with the console, so that's something to bear in mind. But of course, as he points out, a lot of people buying this will probably be N64 fans who probably already own an N64 and a load of cartridges, so they can plug their original controllers into it anyway. And that's kind of the point of it. But nice to see a brand new controller option. Of course, the N64 controllers were a bit weird. I find that much as I enjoy the N64 core on the Mister, the mappings to my 8BitDo Ultimate controller don't always make sense for a lot of the games and do make them quite awkward to play. So to see something a bit more official is always nice. Of course, we also have the Analogue Pocket here on their website, out of stock as always, and all the various cartridge adapters and bits and pieces, the Analogue Duo, and all the other wonderful hardware that they make. So that's the big news this week. People who have pre-ordered their Analogue 3Ds are starting to receive them, and the initial feedback is very good, which is excellent. Unfortunately, no way to order one and buy one if you have watched all of those reviews and are quite keen to get your hands on one. And it seems that's pretty much always the case with Analogue. But there we go. I'm going to start this next story with something of a confession, I will say. And this isn't something that you will hear a lot of us in the Atari ST community talk about a lot, but I'm going to break character for a moment and I'm going to acknowledge this because, well, I have no choice. So, when I was a kid, I had a friend. That's right, I had a friend, believe it or not. And his name was Daryl, and he lived down the road from me. And he had an Amiga 500. And as mentioned, we had the Atari ST, specifically the STE. We got it in 1991. And the larger rivalry between the two systems, of course, Atari and Commodore, big rivals at the time, largely passed us by, I will say. We used to go to each other's houses after school and just play the games on each other's computers, have a really good time, you know. Eat ice poles and ride bikes and do all that stuff that, kids did back in the early 90s. And, of course, I had a load of games that he didn't have, and he had a load of games that I didn't have, and we'd play them, and we'd have loads of fun, and we wouldn't really acknowledge stuff like the fact that the Atari ST didn't have hardware scrolling or DSP audio or, some of the slightly more advanced features that the Amiga had to offer. And, of course, the official line from those of us in the ST community is that, well, all of those early games for the first few years, they were just direct ports from the ST anyway, so they were no better on the Amiga. And by the time the Amiga did get better and developers started to really take advantage of the hardware, the whole world had moved on to the PC anyway, so it doesn't matter. That's kind of, we're kind of trained to say that. However, there is one game that I need to acknowledge, a game that he had. This was a little bit later on, I will say, but a game that he had on his Amiga, and when he got it, I was insanely jealous, and I was looking out for the Atari ST release of it, and we never got it, presumably because the ST was pretty much dead by that point anyway, but also because this is a game that leans very heavily on stuff like that hardware scrolling and the DSP audio and stuff, and higher resolutions and stuff that the Amiga had to offer, and quite rightly so. And I will also say, perhaps a little bit begrudgingly, but maybe not, because I have got to enjoy these games in the years since, that this is one of the best games of all time. Went on to be one of the best series of all time. I am, of course, talking about Worms, a game that was released on the Amiga, the PC, and the Mac as well, I believe, at the time. I think there were some ports to some other consoles and things. And again, it has spawned many, many fantastic sequels over the years as well. And it came up on my radar this week that it is apparently the 30th anniversary of the release of the original Worms. And to celebrate, Team 17 are having a rather big sale of all of the Worms games over on Steam. So I wanted to talk about this for a moment. And yeah, the Worms 30th anniversary sale. For those of us who are perhaps still a little bit bitter that we didn't get it on our Atari ST back in the day, we can go back and we can enjoy the full history of all of the Worms games, including the rather fantastic original from 1995, believe it or not. So, this is the Worms Collection, and it is available on Steam now for £24.26, and this is all of the Worms games on the PC. So apparently, if you bought all of these separately at full price, you would pay £207.27, but you can get the whole collection for 82% off at the moment, which is really cool. So let's have a quick look through these and see what's available. We've got Worms WMD, and I believe this is this is the Worms game from 2016, and I believe this is the one that I played rather a lot of during lockdown back in 2020. Played it online with some very good friends of mine. And apparently this offers a gorgeous hand-drawn 2D look, brand new weapons, and the introduction of crafting, vehicles, and buildings. And it claims here that Worms WMD is the best Worms experience ever, particularly if you like the old original kind of turn-based 2D side-on style of Worms, because there are some games that, believe it or not, don't fit into that mould in this collection. And these are available on Windows and Mac, I will say. So yeah, $2.99 for that. Worms WMD, I can highly recommend that. It's got all the achievements and stuff as well, if you want to check out what a modern Worms game looks like. But we've also got Armageddon from 2013. That's £1.64. The original Worms, if you've never played the original Worms, you should. It is great. It is considered a classic for a reason. 74p for that as well. I mean, that's a no-brainer, isn't it? Worms Revolution from 2012, £1.64. I think a lot of these games are much of a muchness, I will say. But, you've got all the DLC for that as well. Medieval Tales, the Funfair pack, the Customization pack, the Mars pack. Worms Reloaded from 2010. And all the DLC packs for that, the Puzzle pack, the Thoughts pack, the Time Attack pack. We've got Worms World Party, which I believe was the first online Worms game from 2015. Online leaderboard support and 1080p support and stuff like that. So that was kind of the first thoroughly modern classic Worms game on the PC. £1.64 for that. Worms Ultimate Mayhem from 2011. Again, yet another Worms game. Single player pack, multiplayer pack, customization pack for that. Worms Clan Wars, £2.84, biggest and best Worms game to date, or at least it was in 2013. And again, that's more Worms. Worms Rumble, now this one is a little bit different. This was the simultaneous multiplayer one. So rather than being turn-based, it was like this massively multiplayer online 3D-ish Worms game. Quite an interesting looking thing. I've never played it. Perhaps worth checking out, particularly for £1.09. Usually $10.99. And that's got a load of DLC as well, including a bank heist pack. That's quite exciting, isn't it? Captain and Shark pack. Anyway, this one looks quite interesting. Worms Crazy Golf. I had no idea that this was a thing, released in 2011. And rather than your typical Worms combat, it's a side-on Crazy Golf game built using whatever the current Worms engine was at the time. £1.04. I will be buying that and checking that out, because that is one that I didn't even know existed, let alone I actually played. So, Worms Crazy Golf. Worms Blast, which is a puzzle bobble / buster move type game. Again, released around the same time. In fact, released on the same date in 2011. Presumably, again, using whatever the current Worms engine was at the time. But like I say, it's puzzle bobble with Worms. 83p. Worms Pinball, which is a pinball game, as you might expect. And, all the deluxe editions and stuff as well. You get the whole lot for £24. Looks very exciting indeed. And I already own some of these games on Steam, so I'm not quite sure how that affects the pricing of them. But certainly a couple that I'm going to be picking up. This is not an advert, again. I think it's fair to say that there are a lot of people out there who are huge fans of this franchise, and quite rightly so. And if you are on Steam and you like picking up games super cheap in these rather wonderful sales that they have, that will be linked down in the usual places. Worms on the PC. Wonderful stuff. Speaking of big anniversaries, we have had rather a lot this year, haven't we? Of course, we've had the 40th anniversaries of the release of the Atari ST and the Amiga, which I mentioned in that previous story. We've had Windows 95, of course, 30 years old this year. We've had Monkey Island, I think that was 35 years old this year, or something like that. We've had quite a few that I have talked about in the various rambles that I have released over the course of this year. And there is yet another one that I want to acknowledge because there's a rather good article about this console, and in particular because I know I have a lot of viewers and listeners in the US who perhaps aren't so familiar with this console, because while this was very popular here, and indeed across mainland Europe, it wasn't really a big seller in many other places. I think it did quite well in South America as well. And of course, the coverage that you see out there, the mainstream coverage, does tend to focus on this console's big rival, the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System. Perhaps rightly so, as I guess Nintendo was the bigger name, and it was kind of the bigger. No, you know what? I'm not going to justify that at all. I think this console needs more love, and that's why I'm covering this here. So, this is the Master System, and it is the 40th anniversary of the release of this console. Of course, the predecessor to the Mega Drive, or the Genesis, if you prefer. And one that I think it's fair to say is kind of much loved and appreciated here in the UK. Specifically, I think pretty much everyone knows someone who owned a Master System, if they didn't own one themselves. I certainly had a couple of friends who had them back in the day, either the Master System 1 or the Master System 2. And quite rightly that this at least gets some recognition. So I'm going to read a little bit of this article to you, not the entire thing, but of course it will be linked if you want to go and check that out, because it is a very good introduction to this console and what it was all about. So this is Keith Stewart writing over on theguardian.com, big national British newspaper. 40 years ago, the Nintendo Entertainment System dominated the market in Japan and the US, but in Europe, a technologically superior rival was making it look like an ancient relic. I do like a bit of hyperbole. Anyway, there's an old maxim that history is written by the victors, and that's as true in video games as it is anywhere else. Nowadays, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the Nintendo Entertainment System was the only console available in the mid to late 1980s. If you were brought up in Nintendo's target markets of Japan and North America, this chunky contraption essentially was the only game in town. The company had Mario, after all. And its vice-like hold on third-party developers created a monopoly for major titles of the era. But in Europe, where home computers ruled the era, the NES was beaten by a technologically superior rival. The Sega Master System was originally released in Japan in the autumn of 1985 as the Sega Mark III. Based around the famed Z80 CPU, used in home computers such as the Spectrum, the Amstrad and the TRS-80, and a powerful Sega-designed video display processor, it boasted 8K of RAM, a 64-colour palette, and the ability to generate 32 sprites on screen at one time, making the NES, based on the older 6502 processor, look like an ancient relic. Right, he's really pushing that narrative, isn't he? But I wouldn't say the Z80 was that much better than the 6502, was it? Anyway, let's give the Master System its moment. So at first, it was marketed domestically as a continuation of Sega's SG-1000 series of machines, which were closer to affordable home computers than games consoles, with their optional keyboards and printers. But as the NES exploded in both Japan and the US, Sega had a rethink, removed some computing features, and re-released the Mark III in 1986 as the Master System, an unapologetic games machine with a sleek, slimline, angular look, contrasting the beige Betamax visage of the NES. And yes, I'm going to continue to say NES rather than NES, because I'm British, innit? It came with a light gun, and Sega even released a pair of 3D glasses for the system, and a range of compatible games. Why is my computer lagging? There we go. I am going to call out the 3D version of Outrun, says coder Chris White, who wrote a Master System emulator later used by Sega on its Play Sega website. Sure, it made your head hurt, and the alternate flickering of the lenses was enough to trigger a mild seizure, but it's reflective of an era when Sega wasn't afraid to try wild experiments. Anyway, I'm not going to sit here and read the entire story of the Master System to you. As I say, this is a rather excellent and in-depth article all about it. We've got Sonic the Hedgehog here. A lot of people associate Sonic with the Mega Drive, or the Genesis, if you prefer. But there was a really, really excellent version of Sonic on the Master System as well. And of course, we also had the Game Gear, which was essentially a handheld Master System. So a very influential and rather underrated console, I will say. And this is my opportunity to give a bit of a shout out to one of my favourite YouTube channels as well. This is Yesterzine, which is run by the rather fantastic Dudley, who is a good friend of mine, I will say. And yeah, does some really good in-depth coverage of the Master System, among many other things as well. There's some Amiga stuff and some Commodore 64 stuff and whatnot on here. But yeah, a huge Master System fan and covers the console in great detail. There is a playlist of Master System specific videos over on Yesterzine that you can go and check out. But yeah, lots of, if you want to discover some of the gaming catalogue and stuff, and covered in a rather entertaining and very professional style. It's a channel that I can recommend. So I will link that as well if you are inside on this rather frosty weekend with nothing else to do and want to sit down and watch some YouTube and discover a new channel. So there we go. Anyway, that's 40 years of the Master System and a recommendation of a new YouTube channel for you to go and check out. Please do go and give him a subscribe. And yeah, happy birthday, I guess, is all that's left to say. Wonderful, wonderful console, an icon of the 8-bit era. So a detour into the modern world, just for a moment, if you'll allow me, to talk about VPNs. And no, this isn't some new sponsor thing, although you would be forgiven for thinking that that was the case, considering how many YouTubers these days are sponsored by these services. Of course, they are really big business, people looking to protect their privacy, perhaps access streaming services from other parts of the world, and less importantly, trying to prevent people in the coffee shop from getting into their Facebook account, because apparently that's something that VPNs can do, at least if you listen to these YouTubers. But anyway, joking aside, this is a very important consideration, because in some parts of the world, they have recently introduced laws that require age verification, people to provide ID to be able to access certain services, stuff like certain adult websites, and even things like Discord that could potentially give people access to adult content. I'm not going to give you my opinions on that, but of course, inevitably, people are finding ways around that, and part of that involves using VPNs, because there are other parts of the world that don't have these laws, and if you access these services from those other parts of the world, you can bypass those checks. So yeah, this usage of VPNs is becoming a pretty pervasive thing, and it's something that governments are starting to look into. Unfortunately, as we know, the people running most of our countries know absolutely nothing about technology and how it works, and are trying to introduce completely ridiculous laws, and this is no exception. So this is a story over on the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF.org, of course, really big champions of kind of privacy and data protection and stuff like that. And they've been around forever and always been a big fan of their work. This story is lawmakers want to ban VPNs. This is the headline here. And they have no idea what they're doing. So yeah, a story here from Rindala Alajaji. And the story reads, remember when you thought age verification laws couldn't get any worse? Well, lawmakers in Wisconsin, Michigan, and beyond are about to blow you away. Now, I will say that the EFF is a US-based institution, so this does have a bit of an American slant to it. But if you click on that link that says Beyond, that's actually a BBC News story about our own government here in the UK, also talking about, attempting to ban the use of VPNs to access some of these services. So this is a very real concern here as well. I just wanted to point that out. But anyway, going back to the EFF website, it's unfortunately no longer enough to force websites to check your government-issued ID before you can access certain content, because politicians have now discovered that people are using virtual private networks, VPNs, to protect their privacy and bypass these invasive laws. Their solution? Entirely ban the use of VPNs. Yes, really. As of this writing, Wisconsin lawmakers are escalating their war on privacy by targeting VPNs in the name of protecting children. In AB 105/SB 130, which are just proposed laws, it's an age verification bill that requires all websites distributing material that could conceivably be deemed sexual content to both implement an age verification system and also to block the access of users connected via VPN. And of course, the story goes on. This is really, really good reading, by the way. You should go and read it. There is a lot here, a lot of really good detail. But I wanted to kind of bring people's attention to this section here. Here's why this is a terrible idea, because At some point, the majority of us who use computers, like in our day jobs and stuff, will use a VPN, whether knowingly or not. I think, is that a fair thing to say? Because of course, if you've got companies that are connected across multiple sites, they usually have their own VPNs to connect those sites. If you ever work from home, work remotely, or you travel for work and dial into the company's system to get access to your internal servers and stuff like that, that will be using a VPN. University students and people like that also use them. And, we've already seen stuff like Discord and other websites kind of being swept up in this because they could potentially be hosting adult content. And for those websites to now have to have a legal requirement to ban people who are using VPNs, and that's any VPN, is ridiculous. Not least because technically trying to ban these things is going to be almost impossible. As we've seen, stuff like the Pirate Bay, for example, here in the UK, certain URLs are banned, and you can't just type, piratebay.org into your browser. You have to search for Pirate Bay proxy and then click on something and go to a different URL to access that site, because every so often a court will come along and say, all of these URLs are used to access the Pirate Bay. We need to ban all of them, which has no effect whatsoever on people trying to access that specific website. And laws like this are going to be exactly the same when it comes to VPNs, aren't they? And they're just going to make normal users' lives very, very difficult. As always, well done, governments. Totally in touch with technology. I'm ranting, aren't I? I do like a good rant. Anyway, it's because it's so bloody cold in here. Anyway, yes, websites subject to this proposed law are left with this choice: either cease operation in Wisconsin or block all VPN users everywhere, just to avoid legal liability in the state. One state's terrible law is attempting to break VPN access for the entire internet, and the unintended consequences of this provision could far outweigh any theoretical benefit. Like I say, this is not just in Wisconsin, this is also here in the UK and in many other parts of the world as well. This is being discussed. So as mentioned, and this is a very good breakdown of this, almost everyone uses VPNs. Businesses run on VPNs, every company with remote employees, every business traveller connecting through sketchy hotel Wi-Fi. Students need VPNs for school. Universities require students to use VPNs to access research databases, course materials, and library resources. These aren't optional, and many professors literally assign work that can only be accessed through the school VPN. We've got vulnerable people, of course, that's quite a big consideration. People in parts of the world that have quite strict laws on certain things. I'm not going to go into too specific details, but people that just with a very legitimate need to protect their privacy and their online activity, quite rightly so, including people like journalists and domestic abuse survivors and people like that, which are specifically mentioned in this article. Telling those people that they can't access a huge chunk of the internet, which has been wrongly identified as potentially adult, is potentially a huge problem. And of course, regular people just choosing to use them if they want to, that should be their choice. I have a VPN set up on my router at home. I have one here at the studio. I have one at the office. Sometimes I just connect to it and, because I want to look like I'm browsing from that part of the world or access certain things. Banning that completely, it's ridiculous. Anyway, so this is a very, very detailed article. Talks about why this is a bad idea, why it's going to be very, very difficult to implement, and why it's going to have a lot of very wide-ranging knock-on effects for legitimate users. So I wanted to bring your attention to this article. Again, it's quite a long read, but it's a very good read for a cold winter weekend such as this. And also something that we very much need to raise awareness of, I think. So it doesn't fall under the remit of my usual vintage and retro type stuff, but it is something that it does affect me personally and will also affect you, and that I do think is quite important. So that's the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF.org website, and rather splendid breakdown of why governments trying to ban VPNs is just a downright bad idea. Right, so I'm going to bring back a bit of a feature that I used to actually do quite regularly here on Reese Rambles, and I haven't done for quite a while. And that is this kind of quick fire selection of stories that I don't really have any kind of in-depth observations or commentary about, but I do want to bring to your attention because I do think that all of these are very interesting in their own right for their own reasons. I just don't want to pad them out by sitting here and trying to talk about each one for 10 minutes. So also, it's been quite an active week over on the Discord. Lots of people chatting about lots of very interesting stuff. I guess because quite a lot of us have been stuck inside. Did I mention that it's cold here in the UK? I think I mentioned that. Anyway, let's rattle through these. And of course, all of these will be linked in the description if you are watching this on YouTube, or indeed in the show notes on your favourite podcast app of choice. Let's see what the latest is. So, story over on Tom's Hardware first for you. This is about Silverstone, the PC case manufacturer. I have reported, of course, on the previous two iterations of this case, the FLP01 and the FLP02. As you might expect, this latest one is known as the FLP03. Right, Mark Tyson over on Tom's Hardware, whose stories we seem to be featuring pretty much every week here. So keep up the good work, Mark. This is its latest homage to beige 1980s PC design. Retro Micro ATX case has modern amenities. Or amenities. However you say that. But this Micro ATX size model isn't different enough to the FLP02 to excite us. Well, speak for yourself, Mark. Anyway, Silverstone has taken attendees to its Expo 2025 in Japan by surprise with an early appearance of the unannounced FLP03. If you're a fan of these cases, cooling and power specialists' prior tributes to the 1980s PC chassis, then you will be interested in this. It's another tower form factor design, but a little smaller, targeting micro ATX builds. We have a full comparison below. So I talked about the FLP01 was a desktop form factor case, which was very much in the retro 1980s style, but supported modern ATX motherboards. Then they did a tower version of that, and I like the, is there a picture of these? I don't know if there's a picture of these. The drive bay covers that they have on these cases that look like 5¼ inch drives, which I think, 5¼ inch floppy drives, which I think are really cool. And essentially what Silverstone have done is taking that hulking great beast of an ATX tower case, and they've made a micro ATX version of that, but still very much in the retro style, which is cool to see. I don't think there's any information on pricing or release dates or anything like that at the moment, but they are showing this thing off at this show in Japan at the moment at Expo 2025. Very cool stuff. So the next story I have for you is completely and utterly unrelated. Like I say, this is a bit of a mixed bag. This is a port of Another World, of course that fantastic classic adventure game, to the MSX, although not your kind of common run-of-the-mill NSX machines. This is for the MSX Turbo R, which is a bit of a beast of a machine from back in the day. OPL4 sound as well for this game, which of course is quite a rare and exciting thing in and of itself. But if you are someone who is lucky enough to own an MSX Turbo R, or I guess you could run this in an emulator, or perhaps the Mister if you so fancy, you can check out this rather lovely port of Another World by Ed Biddulph. So you can download this for free. You can download the ROM for free, load it up in your Mister or your emulator, or indeed on an MSX flash cart, and check it out on your machine. And yeah, it looks like a very, very faithful port indeed of the original game. Of course, made famous on the Amiga, I think, back in the day. And did this also get it? I think this got a PC release as well. The wonderful full screen kind of animated cinematic 2D graphics and stuff. And very much kind of quite a big milestone, I think, in the world of these adventure games. So yeah, if you're lucky enough to own that hardware, or indeed have an interest in it and a way of checking it out, you can do that. And that will be linked, of course. Moving swiftly on to the next story. This is to do with HEVC. So this is H.265 video decoding. And if you own a modern business-focused high-end laptop from HP or Dell, you might discover that the hardware HEVC decoding is being disabled in your laptop. So it's actually supported at the CPU level and has been for quite some years now. It says here AMD has made laptop chips supporting the codec since 2015. But yeah, this is actually being disabled, and you will see direct results of this. For example, if you are playing H.265 video, YouTube supports it, for example, and a lot of other kind of online video playback things, in the web browser. If you have hardware acceleration enabled, you're going to find that this is not going to work at all, and you're going to have to switch to software rendering for these videos. And the reason for this is licensing, apparently. Apparently, they are increasing the price of the HEVC license. And yeah, HP and Dell are refusing to play ball. They don't want to pay the increased cost of the license, which apparently is an ongoing thing, even on existing hardware that's already been sold. And so they are disabling that for people who already own these laptops. A very in-depth article about this and the people that are going to be affected by this over on Ars Technica. So yeah, it just ends with this line. This is pretty ridiculous, given these systems are $800 plus a machine, a part of a pro line, and more applications these days outside of Netflix and streaming TV are getting around to adopting HEVC, a Redditor wrote. So yeah, something to look out for if you own one of these laptops. That is being reported over on Ars Technica. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say about that. So we'll move on to a new magazine. Are you enjoying this format? Quite random, isn't it? So yeah, this is a type-in magazine, very much in the 80s style. So when we got these magazines back in the 8-bit era, they had listings for programs that you could type in on your home computer. And this one is specifically aimed at modern-day HTML. So if you're interested in learning HTML, you can get this magazine and you can have some type-in examples of like websites and interactive stuff and games and things like that you can check out. 10 wonderful web apps, including games, toys, puzzles, and utilities. No coding knowledge needed. You just type. And yeah, we've got, of course, got illustrations in here by Happy Toast, who I have been following for a very long time on the socials. So great to see that. I knew I recognised that art style from somewhere. Really cool stuff. And yeah, some some contributions from some big names, some quite noteworthy people involved in this. And this is a physical printed magazine with a glossy cover. And yeah, it's a magazine of HTML source code that you type it in. And it's a bit of a novelty type thing, but also it's it's also a bit of fun and quite a fun way to learn some HTML as well, I guess, and relive the past. Those days of typing in your own code. $7.99 for the paperback. It's called DocType. As I say, it has 10 amazing web pages included. And that's very much a thing. I love that people are still making stuff like this, so it's quite cool to see that. Next up, something else that's also completely unrelated. Another story on Tom's Hardware from the ubiquitous Mark Tyson. Not to be confused with his, presumably his brother, Mike Tyson. And this is about the world's first microprocessor, but apparently it is pretty much completely unknown because this was designed for military applications. And this was the MP944, the real world's first microprocessor, top secret for nearly 30 years. And this is the chip from the F-14 Tomcat fighter jet, of course. Lived in the shadow of the Intel 4004, of course that famous, I think it was a 4-bit CPU. But apparently it was 8 times faster. Now, this was a new one on me. I was not familiar at all with the MP944. But this pioneering microprocessor was classified military secret from 1970 to 1989 as a vital part of an advanced fighter aircraft control systems. And there is a wonderful, wonderful in-depth article here talking about the history of this processor and what it was all about in June 1970, over a year before Intel's 4004 would become available in November 1971. And it worked as part of a 6-chip system for the real-time calculation of flight parameters such as altitude, airspeed, and Mach number, and was a key innovation to enable the Tomcat's articulated sweep wing system. Of course, they had those cool folding wings on those things as well, didn't they, back in the day? I remember having a toy one of those as a kid. That's really cool. So I haven't actually read this article yet, I will say, or at least I haven't read all of it. I have very briefly skimmed the first part of it. But yeah, really interesting. And it's cool to learn about this stuff as well, isn't it? Stuff that kind of passed the world by at the time and challenges our existing kind of thoughts on these things. But moving on to the next thing, as promised, something again completely unrelated. This is a BBC Micro emulator. And this runs in your web browser. But the cool thing about this, if you are watching this on YouTube, you're in for a treat. Because look at this. You can drag it around. And you've got the Cub monitor here. Of course, these were widely used in British classrooms in the 80s and into the early 90s. You can also zoom in and out on this as well, if you like. And it is a fully functional BBC Micro emulator. So you can type your code in. Go to temp, run. There we go. Classic. I don't know which key here is mapped to the break key, so I guess this is just going to keep running forever. But if nothing else, if you even if you don't want to get involved with basic programming and typing any code into this thing, you can at least go to the website and you can have a good look around it using your mouse to browse around. And funnily enough, I am setting up the museum space, of course, in the office next door to this one. And I actually got my BBC Micro set up. If you remember my old studio setup, I actually had the BBC Micro in the window as part of the window display. And I have it up and running and plugged in and powered up now. And I fired it up. And I was actually playing Chucky Egg the other day on it for the first time in a very, very long time. So very cool to see that machine is still working. And kind of sparked an interest in the BBC Micro for me once again. So it was very cool to see this pop up. And it's just a very fun thing to play with. But we can't hang around forever because, of course, we need to move on to the next thing. And this is the Pebble smartwatches, which I previously reported on. Of course, they use those e-ink displays. I owned the original one, and then I bought, or at least I was involved with the crowdfunding thing for the second one. And by the time it arrived, I think I'd already moved on to a Fitbit, and I just kind of sold mine on eBay. And that's a story I kind of all explained in the past. But apparently, this new relaunch of the Pebble, which does involve one of the original founders of the original Pebble smartwatch company, has come up against some controversy because apparently some of the code, and apparently as is being reported, not casting any allegations myself, any aspersions upon this individual, but apparently some of the source code involved with this project has been lifted from from some other sources without giving full attribution as required. So story here on howtogeek.com by Joe Fedua. When Eric Mijikovsky and his new company Core Devices popped up, there was a lot of new excitement for the Pebble ecosystem again. The folks at Rebel, who have painstakingly maintained the Pebble App Store for the last 9 years, initially joined in that excitement. However, the situation has soured. Last month, Rebel highlighted its agreement with Core Devices, the company producing new Pebble smartwatches. Rebel would focus on the web services they've lovingly maintained, and Core would handle the new hardware. It sounded like the perfect partnership, but that optimistic vision seems to be already crumbling. So, apparently this new relaunch of the Pebble smartwatch, which I previously reported, apparently they've kind of gone back on this deal with Rebel and kind of tried to screw them over. Like I say, stolen some of their code. Not stolen, that's quite a strong word, but you know what I mean. And they're kind of refusing to honour their side of their agreement. At least Rebel are claiming. Essentially trying to take over the running of all of this stuff and make all Rebel's hard work over the years completely redundant, which is quite kind of a bit of an insult to this wonderful community effort. So if you want to go and read about that before getting involved with the new Pebble relaunch, probably some quite important information for you there over on How To Geek. And of course, this is something that I have reported on previously and something that I have been quite excited about previously. So it only seemed right to bring this to your attention. But I don't like to focus on the negative here, of course, on Reese Rambles. So for my final story in this little wrap-up, what is this? 14 minutes worth already for this segment. That's why I split it up. Why I didn't split them all up into individual stories. I want to move on to something rather positive, and this is from Microsoft again, and their ongoing efforts to open source and release some really cool historical stuff. I have reported on these previously. Of course, their original BASIC they open sourced a while ago, along with some other stuff. I can't remember off the top of my head at the moment, but this is Zork 1, 2, and 3. Of course, those classic games from back in the day. And Microsoft has open sourced them this week, which is, unexpected, but very nice to see. Good stuff. So a story here by Stacey Hafner, and Scott Hanselman, who is a name that I'm very familiar with, big name in the community. Today we're preserving a cornerstone of gaming history that is near and dear to our hearts. Together, Microsoft's open source programs office, Team Xbox and Activision are making Zork 1, 2, and 3 available under the MIT license. Our goal is simple: to place historically important code in the hands of students, teachers, and developers so they can study it, learn from it, and perhaps, more importantly, play it. Always nice to see game preservation acknowledging the fact that just allowing people to play these games, freely and easily is quite an important aspect of game preservation. We don't always have to focus on the academic side of these things. So, yeah, when Zork arrived, it didn't just ask players to win, it asked them to imagine. There were no graphics, no joystick, and no soundtrack, only words on the screen and the player's curiosity. Yet, those words built worlds more vivid than most games of their time. What made that possible wasn't just clever writing, it was clever engineering. Beneath that world of words was something quietly revolutionary: the Z Machine, a custom-built engine. Z Machine is a specification of a virtual machine. Now there are many Z Machine interpreters that we use today that are software implementations of that VM. The original mainframe version of Zork was too large for early home computers to handle, so the team at Infocom made a practical choice. They split it into 3 games, titled Zork 1, 2, and 3, all powered by the same underlying system. That also meant that instead of rebuilding the game for each platform, they could use the Z Machine to interpret the same story files on any computer. That design made Zork one of the first games to be truly cross-platform, appearing on Apple IIs, IBM PCs, and more. And that's the interesting part of this source code release. They built this, of course, nowadays that's basically how games work. They have their own, their own environment that they run in, which is cross-platform. Game engines, as they're known, going back stuff like, the Scum engine and stuff for the LucasArts adventure games, that kind of thing. But yeah, this was pretty much one of the first examples of that, taking a big mainframe game of the time, Zork, building this virtual machine that it could run under, and splitting it up into 3 separate games so it could run on the much more limited home computers of the time. So great article here, and of course the source code is also available for those 3 games, so you can study how that worked, a very early implementation of that kind of setup. And also, very highly regarded and well-considered historically important text adventure games from back in the day. So wonderful to see, and of course also worth celebrating Microsoft actually doing something good for a change and, releasing some stuff as open source. I know there has been some stories, there has been some news about Windows 11 this week adding some AI stuff, and people being advised against using it because it can automatically install malware on their PCs, which isn't a story that I was going to cover in this week's Ramble, but I suppose is at least worth mentioning within the context of this Microsoft story. But anyway, I do like to focus on the positive, like I said, and also on the vintage and the retro. So that is that. Zork source code available. All those other stories in this little roundup. All the links available in the usual places. Of course, if you are watching this on YouTube, down in the description, in the show notes, on your podcast app of choice. I've been talking continuously for 19 minutes now. So I'm going to get a drink of water just before we move on to our video of the week. And indeed, that brings us around rather neatly to our regular video of the week feature, wherein I feature a video that I have seen here on the old YouTube that has entertained or inspired or enlightened, educated or otherwise improved my life in some small way. Sometimes there's one video, sometimes there's more than one, sometimes they are retro and vintage computing, gaming and technology related, and sometimes they aren't. But this week, I have 3 videos for you, and they are all very much on topic. 2 of which covering the hot topic of the moment, which is Steam and Valve, of course, with the announcement of those that new hardware last week, the Steam machine and the VR headset and the new controller and stuff. Everyone jumping on the bandwagon, and quite rightly so. As I say, this is a really big hot topic in the world of gaming at the moment. So one video that I did see pop up on my YouTube homepage was this one from Spawnwave, and I quite enjoyed this because this kind of combines a couple of my interests. So what he actually did was he was browsing through eBay, looking at small form factor PCs, old discarded Office PCs that obviously a lot of companies getting rid of these because of the move to Windows 11. And stumbled across this little small form factor HP Elite Desk thing, and spotted in the photos that it actually had a GPU installed inside it, which is kind of an optional extra for these small form factor PCs. and a proprietary format that's specific to these HP Elite desks, so quite a rare piece of hardware to get hold of. And he spent like $100 on this thing, and it's actually a pretty high-end Ryzen system with like a, I forget what the model of GPU is. You'll have to watch the video to discover that. But what he went on and did was to install Bazzite on it, which is, of course, something I keep banging on and on about. That's a SteamOS-based Linux operating system focused on gaming. Installed that on it and put it through its paces and saw what its performance was like over various games. Of course, kind of older games. It's a small form factor system. It's quite limited in power and stuff. But actually, surprising just how well stuff actually ran on this system. And as he pointed out, of course, with the Steam Machine, this new kind of living room console-focused Valve offering that has been announced, you could buy something like this. You could plug it into your TV, hook up a Bluetooth controller to it, and just have a TV-based, Steam-based console to play older PC games on, and it would work perfectly fine. Lovely little compact thing. I really like projects like this, and I have been looking. Oh, there you go. It's a Ryzen 5 2400GE with an RX 560 4GB card and 16GB of RAM. There's the specs for you. But do still please go and watch the video, because I was very pleasantly surprised, like I say, by the performance of some of the games on this system and just how straightforward it was to kind of get it all set up and get it hooked up to a TV. I've been thinking about doing a video like this for ages. I may well still do one. But yeah. My hat is off to you, Spawnwave, for covering this in a rather nice, accessible way. So that's 13 minutes, 40 seconds, and the title is I Built a Cheap Steam Console to Play the Classics. And speaking of Steam and Valve and those announcements, I also had this come up on my radar. My second video of the week from a channel called Mug Thief. Now, I hadn't come across this one before. This is kind of a commentary type channel. Guy in a gamer chair with a microphone sat in front of a green screen, waffling on about stuff that he's read about on the internet. But I will say this is very, very well researched. This kind of builds upon a load of research from a community on the internet who've been bringing together lots of data mined and leaked information on this subject, and it's a very nice summary of where things currently stand on this. The subject being Half-Life 3. So the title of the video is Half-Life 3 Won't Stop Leaking, and we know a lot. Now, apparently, this was news to me, but apparently episode 2, which was the last installment in the Half-Life series, not including Alex, of course, which was kind of a VR spin-off, but the last kind of mainline installment in the Half-Life series was in 2007. And we've been waiting for either episode 3 or indeed Half-Life 3 ever since. I played the original game when it was released back in, was it 98, 99? Played Half-Life 2 pretty much. In fact, I bought it on release day and the episodes. Portal and all the other stuff that was released around that time. Always been a huge fan of the series and all of its various related and vaguely connected spin-offs and things. I've been desperately looking forward to Half-Life 3 for what seems like most of my life at this point. And according to this video, it seems that it might actually not be far off at all, because there are things popping up in Source Engine games that aren't being used by those games, which seems to indicate that there is some upcoming project. And these features are very, very complete and very sophisticated. And for Valve to not be using them in anything that's currently released, and once you combine all of these things kind of together, it just looks like a new Half-Life game. I know there's been a lot of people desperately clinging on to hope over the years and, looking at leaks and data mined things from other games and saying, oh, look, it's literally just about to be released. But I don't know. The timing kind of feels right at the moment. Of course, we had that big Half-Life documentary for the anniversary. I think that was that earlier this year or perhaps towards the end of last year that was released. I did cover that at the time. And that did talk about some stuff that they had worked on for a potential new Half-Life game that they'd actually abandoned. So it is something that Valve are actively working on. But yeah, there's a lot of information here. I don't know. It feels a little bit different this time. I don't like to talk about Half-Life 3 rumours and leaks and things and get my hopes up. But yeah, with the release of that new hardware from Valve, is it a stretch to think that perhaps they would want some kind of big launch title? I don't think they'd make it exclusive. I don't think they'd be that stupid. But yeah, Half-Life 3 launching alongside the new Steam machines and the new Steam VR stuff, I don't think is that far-fetched. And I thought this was a very good breakdown If nothing else, it's just a very interesting and entertaining video looking at this this group that are kind of collecting together all of these leaks and rumours and things and trying to build a bigger picture out of it, which I thought was quite cool. So good video there, 25 minutes that. So, you know, stick it on your TV and sit down and watch it over your dinner or whatever. That's what I did. From Mug Thief, that's Half-Life 3 Won't Stop Leaking, and we know a lot. However, I promised something a bit more niche as well for my third video. And this will be of interest to probably anyone UK-based of around my age, anyone interested in like sci-fi and technology, and perhaps a wider, kind of more global audience as well. Because this is a video about Red Dwarf. But it is about games. So, yeah, Red Dwarf, of course, the BBC sci-fi series, started way back in the late 80s, ran through most of the 90s, and has seen various kind of attempts at reboots and relaunches and things in recent years. I was a huge Red Dwarf fan as a kid. I am still now, although perhaps not so keen on some of the newer stuff that they've done. But, you know, it has a very special place in my heart, and it's cool that... you know, it's cool that it has this kind of cult following and this big scene around it. And what this video is a collection of official and unofficial Red Dwarf games that were released over the years. Now, I say over the years because actually there weren't any official Red Dwarf games at all, kind of in the 80s and the 90s when the series was still on and was still current, which is really weird. You know, no games released on kind of the 8-bit or the 16-bit systems of the time, and you would have thought that that would be quite an easy decision for such a big kind of BBC show, but apparently not. However, there were some mobile games in the pre-smartphone days, you know, the feature phones, Java-based games. There were a couple, apparently, and indeed some modern-day smartphone games as well that were released alongside the new reboots of Red Dwarf, which I was completely and utterly unaware of. And some of these actually look pretty decent. So wanted to point you in the direction of this channel. It's a channel called Yesterday, which is, you know, a smaller channel. They've got 1,000 subscribers. I'm not subscribed. There you go. Now I am. Haven't seen any of their other videos, but I just thought this was really well put together and taught me a lot about these interesting games that I hadn't come across before from one of my favourite TV programmes from back in the day. And also some really rather good attempts at fan games as well. People building their own adventure games and stuff based around the series. There was one in particular, a point-and-click adventure game in here, and I'm not going to try and find it, wherever it was, that was really well done and actually really surprised me in that kind of, you know, Monkey Island, that kind of LucasArts type style. And if they'd released that as an official thing back in the day, it would have been very cool indeed. So this was a good watch, very well researched and put together video, 20 minutes worth of Red Dwarf games. This is just an interactive DVD quiz thing. This was one of the actual official releases, apparently. Red Dwarf Beat the Geek quiz. Again, one that I was completely unaware of. Great video from a smaller channel. I've just subscribed to it, and I recommend that you do too. But at the very least, go and watch this video about Red Dwarf games because I thought it was very interesting indeed. Hence making it one of my videos of the week. So 3 videos there for you. We have that first one from Spawnwave about turning a low-cost eBay bargain office PC into a games console that you can play with in your living room for all those classic PC games, of course, based on Bazite. A video wrapping up some, you know, Half-Life 3 rumours and stuff and speculating that it perhaps might not be far off at all from Mug Thief. And thirdly and finally, a video from Yesterday all about Red Dwarf games. So hopefully a little bit of something there for everyone. And finally, I'd just like to take a moment to mark the passing of a true industry legend this week. I'm sure this news probably hasn't passed you by, but I couldn't not talk about this, of course. This is a character who I have been following for the longest time over on social media. And I know we use the word legend a lot, but yeah, I think in this case it was very much well earned. So this is Rebecca Heineman, who has sadly passed away from cancer, age 62, as reported here over on IGN.com. Rebecca Heineman, known best for co-founding original Fallout developer Interplay alongside Brian Fargo, Jay Patel and Troy Worrell in the early 1980s, has died age 62. The news was shared by her friend Heidi McDonald, who wrote on Blue Sky that my trailblazing game industry badass friend Rebecca Heineman has passed away. But cancer, friends, let's not forget her. On a GoFundMe page set up by Heineman shortly after her diagnosis, she described herself as the very first video game champion, creator of Bard's Tale 3, Dragon Wars, and one of the founders of Interplay Productions and MacPlay. Creator of Sailor Ranko, the webcomic, and software archivist. The fund remains open to support Heineman's family. In her final message, penned yesterday, November the 17th, she wrote, "It's time. According to my doctors, all further treatments are pointless, so please donate so my kids can create a funeral worthy of my keyboard, Pixel Breaker, so I can make a worthy entrance for reuniting with my one true love, Janelle Jacquet. My daughter, Cynthia Elizabeth Heineman, will be making the arrangements." Of course, her partner also very sadly passing away under similar circumstances a few years ago, which I remember her talking about quite a lot on social media. Heineman rose to fame when she won a National Space Invaders tournament in 1980, age 16, then carved out an impressive game dev career, having taught herself to code by reverse engineering. Her development and publishing credits include Wasteland, Fallout, Baldur's Gate, and The Bard's Tale 3, Thief of Fate, and she most recently served as CEO of Old School. What a great name for a game dev studio. The story just goes on to talk about, many of Heineman's wonderful achievements in the world of game development and some rather nice tributes from some of her friends and colleagues over the years in the game dev industry. So very, very sad loss, of course. Of course, my sympathies to all of her friends and family. That's all I have for you for this week's Ramble. Apologies to end on a low, but I couldn't not acknowledge that. So big thanks, as always, to my community over on Discord for all of your wonderful story submissions and your discussion around them. Other Retro Matt, Vanessa, Manimo, Jeruzal, Steve's Tech Shed, Tim's Retro Corner, Gravitone, Technic, Life Size Teddy Bear, Naoki, and Katrina, specifically deserving of shout-outs this week, I think. That's all I have for you for this week's Ramble, so thank you ever so much for joining me. Of course, these go out at 2 minutes to midnight on Friday night, UK time, both on my second YouTube channel, youtube.com/ReeseRambles, and also on the podcast platforms. If you've heard anything in this week's Ramble that has caught your interest that you'd like to go and do some further reading on, of course, as mentioned multiple times, those stories are linked down below in the description and in the show notes on your podcast app if you are listening using such a method. But that's all I have for you for this week, so hopefully I will see you same time and place again next week for next week's Ramble. Bye.